From Microbe TV, this is Office Hours for Wednesday, August 16, 2023. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me tonight from Charleston, South Carolina, Michael Schmidt.
Hello, everyone, and welcome from a little bit damp Charleston, South Carolina. We're having our evening thunderstorm.
Every night you have a thunderstorm?
If lately we haven't been getting much rain. It's just been getting very dark, booms a couple of times, and drops a few drops of rain, and on it goes.
We had a tornado watch the other night here in New Jersey.
That's unusual.
Yeah, the next morning I saw it on my phone, 2:15 a.m. Didn't help because my phone's not next to me at night.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't. It said, go in your basement. I was damned if I'm going in my basement.
That's where your studio is. You could record another TWiM.
Yeah, do a live stream. Say, hey, what's happening with this tornado? Oh, I spent the night in the basement during Sandy. Remember Hurricane Sandy?
Oh, I do indeed. I was on pins and needles praying that it wouldn't hit Charleston.
Well, all the trees on the street went down. They took all the wires out. We didn't have power for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It was a mess because this is the least populated street in the town, so they don't want to do it first, so they did it last.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody, to another Office Hours where you get to talk with people who study very small things. And I want to welcome... Go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say we interact with the unseen life on planet Earth.
Yeah. What is the TWiM, the podcast about unseen life on Earth? We had one episode, Unseen Life, with unpronounceable words. How did that go?
Yes. Yeah, it was fairly early on in our TWiM cycle, a long time ago. It's been a while since we've been doing TWiM.
Yeah, it's a long time. 220 episodes. Tomorrow we record number 220.
No, 295 or 294 tomorrow.
Oh, no. Are you serious?
294 tomorrow.
Wait a minute.
It's 294 tomorrow.
294, you're right. Oh, yeah. We're coming up on 300. So let's see. We do 2 a month, 294, and that's it. Then we'll have another one in August, 295. We'll have 2 in
September.
That's 296 and 7. 2 in November.
October.
290. We're going to hit it in December.
Yes.
Well, if we timed it properly, we could do it in Phoenix, but we're probably not going to do
that.
Well,
we could record it in Phoenix off cycle as TWiM episode number 300. Now, everyone on the live stream is getting a heads up on how we plan TWiM.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I want to thank our moderators tonight. We have Les in the house. We have Andrew. We have Steph. And I just saw Frank pop in. And Vanity Nutrition. Welcome, everyone, to another live stream. Appreciate your being here. And welcome, everyone from all over the world. Let's see if we can impress Professor
Well, while you're looking
Schmidt.
at the attendees, let me clarify the vanity shot of me in a stethoscope and a white coat without a mask. Well, that picture was taken in 2015 by our marketing team. And you do all sorts of strange things when your marketing team tells you to bring a lab coat and bring the device that you had been investigating in a clinical trial. That stethoscope is actually made out of an antimicrobial material, principally copper, and it was made for us by 3M/Linton. And those of you who are physicians appreciate that Linton makes the finest stethoscopes, and the stethoscope that was around my neck had antimicrobial copper surfaces, as well as a copper beryllium diaphragm. And copper beryllium is one of the best sound transducers out there. It's what's in the high-end Macintosh speakers that many audiophiles covet. And I'm not a physician, and I ended up only playing one on that image because our marketing team was trying to generate some interest in the clinical trial that we were doing to foster the control of healthcare-associated infections. And stethoscopes are indeed a significant fomite that is responsible for the transference of microbes from people to people, stethoscope to people. And one thing that everyone should appreciate, and a physician explained this to me, is that if you're going to use a stethoscope, you have to use it on skin. You cannot listen to someone's heart through their shirt. It cuts down on the fidelity of the sound. Stethoscope should be on naked skin. So check with Daniel tomorrow when you're interviewing him for this week's clinical update, and see if he listens to people's hearts when he's auscultating on naked skin, because one of the clinicians at my institution, Dr. Steve Schabel, is the one who said, only listen on naked skin. And he teaches our med students that, and he instructs them to only listen on skin. So
how much would that stethoscope that you had there cost?
It's basically comparable to the Lytton cardiac scope. We made it cost effective. Specifically, the amount of copper in it is minuscule. And the principal complaint that folks had with using it is we didn't optimize the copper braiding along the sound conducting tube. We just used off-the-shelf copper braiding, and it was a bit heavy. So 3M/Lytton, if they ever do go ahead and indeed manufacture that for sale, they'll use a finer, lighter grade of copper. But we were trying to develop it with off-the-shelf parts, and Lytton was most gracious. And the major expense in manufacturing this stethoscope was in the casting of the sound bell. That's a solid piece of copper that's cast, and it's polished to high luster, and it's quite an impressive scope. But like all clinical trials that involve devices, we had to return them all back to the manufacturer at the conclusion of the trial. And this was a trial done at my institution as well as Northwell, one of Daniel's hospitals up on Long Island. So
I have no idea how much a stethoscope costs. Give me a ballpark.
About $300.
$300. So most physicians have one or several?
Most physicians have their favorite, and they buy it. Typically, they invest. They get one as their med student, and the cardiac scopes are a little bit better. There's some that are specifically designed to listen for pediatrics. I learned a lot about stethoscopes during that trial.
And nurses have stethoscopes too, right?
Yes, indeed.
And physician's assistants and all these other new
Everyone
things
does. It's a big market, and you're supposed to clean it after each use. You're supposed to use an alcohol wipe on various aspects of it because it is indeed a fomite. It will transfer microbes, and we learned that it did indeed transfer microbes.
I don't know what
but now we have plastic. They're now selling a product that you put your stethoscope bell into a device, and then a cover goes onto it, so that doesn't cut the sound transmission much. But anytime you interact with the diaphragm, you are indeed disturbing the fidelity of the transduction of the sound.
I see.
And the audiophiles in our listening audience will immediately tell us all about sound transduction.
So did the trial show that copper was effective?
Indeed it did.
And so now are scopes made with copper?
No, because we weren't able to
Great.
demonstrate the gold standard, which was to reduce infections. And given that there are so many inputs into the infection control cycle, copper is just but one addition metric or component of the infection control bundle that needs to be added. And since physicians typically purchase their own scope, unless the hospital goes ahead and does it in bulk, and the hospital wants to have prima facie evidence that stethoscopes do indeed cause infections. It's the whole issue of causality. Where did the infecting agent come from? Was it from Vincent? Was it from me? Was it from the stethoscope? Was it from the bedpan? Was it from the bed rail? And causality is the struggle, how to prove it.
So Rima says surgeons don't use stethoscopes, but my dad had a stethoscope he was a chest surgeon. Maybe that's why he used a stethoscope, right?
My best friend is a transplant surgeon out of Philadelphia, and he uses a stethoscope. He's actually used it on me on occasion.
So one more stethoscope question. The most of the use of a stethoscope is in the chest area to listen, right? But you could use it. I know they used to put it on your arm when they were taking blood pressure in the old days, right?
To listen when the pulse is restored after the compression is released.
Would there be any other place? Your neck.
They listen to your neck. And in fact, we teach our dental students to use a stethoscope because they listen for breweries in the carotid arteries when they're doing their annual examination. They should be listening for breweries. And I just had my annual eye exam, and my optometrist actually listened to my carotid arteries.
Interesting.
It's all part of physical diagnosis. And I'm not a physician, and I've learned a lot being in a medical school for 35 years. I sort of haven't graduated yet.
Well, if you keep your eyes and ears open, you're bound to learn something, right?
It helps to be curious. And that's why I love doing TWiM. It's why I love listening to TWiV and all the other Twix podcasts, because you learn something new and it gets added to your lexicon of things that you can think about.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see where people are from here. Alina is from Coxsackie, New York. Alina, you need to email me so I can ship you my dad's microscope, Vincent@microbe.tv. Kip and Laura from San Francisco. Thanks for your contribution, Kip and Laura.
I think I met Kip and Laura at the incubator, the one and only time I've been up there.
Yeah, that was our spring 2022 fundraiser.
Yes.
That didn't raise much funds, but that was still fun. Yes.
We had a good time.
And Kip and Laura's daughter is working in New York City, so they periodically come visit, and I've seen Kip not too long ago. See, who else is here? Boulder, Colorado. There you go. China. Oh, yes, Will is in China. What part of China? Shanghai? Tell me. I'm going to China in November. Have you ever been to China, Michael?
I have not been to China. It's one of the few crazy places not crazy places. It's one of the few places I haven't been to. I've been to a lot of unusual places. I've been to places like Chernobyl and Santiago, Chile, and all sorts of unusual places, not crazy.
Pete's from London. Jessica's from the University of Toledo in Ohio. Vanity, our mod, is here for a few before her flight departs. Kathleen is at the Jersey Shore. Brian is in Montreal. Rima is in Iowa, Lebanon. And Patricia seems to be in an airplane, I guess, right?
Yeah, or she's on airplane mode.
Nebby is from Florida. Kang is from Chicago, where I will be for ASTMH in October, Kang. I'm going to be downtown somewhere if you want to get together. Yeah, check it out. South Carolina, Martha, that's your state, Michael.
That is
right?
indeed. And she sent us an email to TWiM, and we'll probably read her email tomorrow.
By the way, Heather says nurses like Littman stethoscopes too.
That's who made this one.
East End of Long Island. Wayne, New Jersey. Colorado. We're going to go back and catch some of these interesting emails. Ontario, Canada. What else? Anybody from, here we go, Vashon Island, Washington.
Is that a cauliflower? Looked like he had a cauliflower on his affiliated with his name.
Maybe. It's kind of yellow though, right? Maybe they're yellow. Urbana, Illinois. I think you spent some time there, didn't you?
No, I went to Harvard at Halstead, the University of Illinois in Chicago.
Chicago, okay.
It's referred to as Harvard at Halstead. Or at least it was when I was there.
Asheville's North Carolina,
That's a beautiful
right?
place. It's a beautiful place. It's in the mountains.
Montreal, Santa Barbara, Wisconsin. I know Andrew's in New Zealand. Patricia has a Littman Cardio 3 stethoscope. It's great.
And that's what that model was. It was modeled after the Littman Cardio 3.
Les is from California. Ian says, dentists also check for heart murmurs.
I told you.
There you go. This is another Laura from Albany, Oregon. Hey, you're wearing your TWiM shirt. Good for you. Dayton, Ohio. Near D.C. Carol, our nephrologist, uses her stethoscope to listen for a bruit in my patient's dialysis fistulas. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what's a bruit?
Clots, plaque accumulation,
Okay.
the bad stuff that you don't want in your carotid arteries. It's basically causing turbulent flow. What you want in your blood vessel is perfect laminar flow. If it becomes turbulent, that's when your platelets go out of whack and begin to do all sorts of bad things.
All right, Portland, Oregon.
38C? Oh my.
It's hot, right?
That's warm. That's warm.
Who said Patricia? Not in an airplane. That was in recognition of vanity. Okay. Patricia's in D.C. Will is in Changsha.
Okay. South
300
of Wuhan.
kilometer south of Wuhan. I know where Changsha is because I might be going there, Will. I have a colleague at the Hunan University in Changsha, right?
Mm-hmm.
I might be visiting in November, so maybe we get together. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Guatemala, there you go. Australia. Bozeman, Montana. Salinas, California is great. Yes, cauliflower, a yellow type. Yep, there you go.
See, I guessed right.
Santa Rosa, California. And yes, turbulence in blood flow. Is that what bruit is? Turbulence?
Yep.
Well, there you go. I learned something tonight.
It goes from laminar flow to turbulent flow, and that's how you make clots. And that's why they give many people who have atrial fibrillations, they are always giving them aspirin to knock down the clotting cascade. Don't ask me how to explain that part, but that's aspirins. That's pharmacology.
Let's see. I wanted to mention a couple of things before we get back to the chat. First of all, Mark Martin has launched his podcast. I should get it up here on the screen so everybody can see it.
I listened to the first 2 episodes. They're quite good, Mark. If you're listening, you should be proud. All Things Matters Microbial, I think, is the title of it.
Let me turn on the screen share so we can all see it there. There we go. Yeah, Matters Microbial. And number 1 was with me. Number 2 was with Maya Breitbart, as you can see here. And number 3 is coming out Friday. That's with Seth Seth, what's his last name? The Wolbachia guy at Vanderbilt.
Oh, if you didn't ask me, I could have probably told you, but now
Seth Bordenstein. Seth
That's it.
Bordenstein. All right, so check that out. That's at microbe.tv and at all the usual places. You could subscribe to on YouTube or as a podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. So that's one thing I wanted to tell everyone. And the other thing is last week I did Mark will probably have you on his Matters Microbial, I'm sure.
I'd love to join Mark. We always have such a interactive time together.
I did an interview last week with Desiree Townsend, who was a young lady who sort of got taken advantage of by the anti-vaxxer movement. And I wondered what people thought about that, if anyone's listened to it. She actually will come back on the office hours in September to talk about her experience, and you can ask her about that.
Well, Robert Kennedy is actually speaking literally 3 blocks away from my house tonight.
He's in Charleston, yeah.
He's in Charleston launching his campaign, trying to convince folks of his crazy. I mean, I listened to your coverage of on TWiM, and I also listened to Paul Offit's discussion of how he is getting things wrong, and I'm uncomfortable with him effectively putting out information that we know is incorrect. And as an attorney, since we're having a discussion about ethics, if you know something is incorrect, doesn't the legal profession have a requirement not to distribute misinformation intentionally? Once someone tells them it's wrong, don't they have an ethical obligation to stop? I mean, he's basically, where's the ethics in the profession?
I don't think they have to tell the truth, Michael.
Well, that's unfortunate.
They can just say it's aspirational, and they can say anything.
Well, science, unfortunately, we have to live with facts.
Well, yes.
And
we like
any scientist who doesn't live in facts becomes a science fiction writer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you and I don't deal in science fiction. Most of the time we ask questions of the things that we work with that can't speak. And the really clever experiments are those that are binary, ones that give us a yes or no answer. Unfortunately, many of us design experiments that give us the maybe. And that's when we redesign the experiment based on the maybe answer in order to try to get to the binary of yes or no.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to live in a profession that only wants facts.
Yes.
Right? Although even in science, there's some rogues who, paint black on the back of their mice to signify a transplant taking.
Unfortunate.
Anyway, Michael, let's see what we have here. Here we have a few. Patricia says David Quammen was on PBS discussing the lab leak theory. He puts it into context very well, very man-on-the-street friendly. Okay. I thought also, his New York Times piece was a bit too lab leak friendly. But, that's my opinion. Yes, Michael, what were you going to say?
He was much better when you interviewed him live on TWiM at the ASM's microbe meeting back in June. He was
you're talking about Eddie Holmes, right? Eddie Holmes.
Oh, Eddie Holmes. It's not Quammen. I'm sorry. No. I'm missing up the celebrities.
The Eddie Holmes was great. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. He was very good. Okie dokie. What else do we have here? Yeah, here we go. What's Michael Schmidt's domain? Is he an MD researcher? I feel like I should know. No, he just told you that. as you
I'm
heard.
a card carrying microbiologist, literally card carrying since 1982 when I joined the American Society for Microbiology, when you had to be nominated to attain the status of member.
So Patricia says it very well. I'm going to go down here. So she said there's no actual evidence for lab leak theory. So then it's not a theory because theories are based on having some evidence. And I don't know why everybody keeps talking about it then. It's one of those things that, yeah, it could be possible, but there's no evidence. So why do we keep talking about it? Why do we have Kwame being interviewed about it? Why do we have him writing a huge piece where half of it is devoted to lab leak and there's zero evidence for it? I don't get it. But maybe I'm just dumb, Michael. Maybe I'm stupid.
No, it's all about the evidence. Last week in the New England Journal of Medicine, they published an article or a perspectives piece on artificial intelligence and big data. And it was really challenging the medical field to get the next generation of healthcare providers to think in terms of probabilistic clinical reasoning, where they look at large sets of data and begin to make informed decisions that will result in better patient outcomes. And I sort of got a chill as I was reading there's a table in that particular article, and it's really quite compelling. If you bear with me, I'll see if I can display that table, because I think your audience would find it fascinating to see what people in the field are beginning to think about in terms of what's going on. And of course, there it is. No, that's not it. And of course, I can't find it when I'm looking for it. But it was in last week's New England Journal of Medicine, and it was on preparing physicians for the revolution in AI that is coming in. You know, we in microbiology have been using AI for quite some time to help us put together all the data that we're generating from 16S and whole genome sequencing and assembling genomes and trying to make sense using techniques like principal component analysis.
We just didn't call it AI, right?
That is correct.
We called it computational biology.
Which it is.
So why is AI is just a sexy name, right? That's the
It's
thing.
a sexy name, and it's just more user friendly. Computational biology, you had to commit to. AI, you can just ask GPT or Bard a question and you get an answer back. And to give a shameless plug for our upcoming TWiM, tomorrow I'm going to talk about a technique that an Italian group used to probe the genomes associated with ice cream production, affiliated with the ice cream production plants. So, as they say, stay tuned.
All right, I'm going to show you ChatGPT being a jerk, okay?
Okay.
Here we are. I'm going to make sure that you can see it here. Okay. So, all right, this is a good one. Please, where is it? Where's the thing? Okay. Please give a one-sentence definition of a virus, okay?
Okay.
Because if you don't say one sentence, it goes on forever. Virus is a microscopic infectious agent composed of genetic material encased in a protein coat capable of replicating only within living host cells. So that's that's right.
That is right. If it was really clever, it would have put only all in caps. Only when living in cells.
Yeah, the problem is that there was something else I asked it today, and it gave a distinctly wrong answer, which I was hoping to reproduce, but I asked the wrong question. But so Eckhard Wimmer will say he got poliovirus to replicate in a cell-free medium, a test tube. Okay, he made an extract of cells. He threw in polio RNA, and out came infectious particles. So in nature, yes, viruses need to get in cells, but in the laboratory, they don't have to. You can do it.
Well, he gave it ribosomes. He
Well,
gave
it was all in the
it
extract, right? He gave it ribosomes.
all in the extract, so it was all there. If he had fractionated it and sized it appropriately so that you excluded big things like ribosomes, he would have had a null experiment.
Yeah. So whenever you say, but it's true that in organisms, the viruses have to get into cells. I wish I could remember. Anyway, ChatGPT gives a lot of wrong answers, so I'm not sure why people think it's better than just doing a Google search and knowing what you're looking for. But what do I know?
All right. I have found the paper while Vincent was talking, and the title of the paper was Preparing Physicians for the Clinical Algorithm Era. And the table I would like to call your attention to is recommended changes to medical education and training to improve probabilistic reasoning and support effective use of clinical or CDS, clinical diagnostic, or what is the clinical decision support systems.
This is a New England Journal article, right?
Right. NEJM. And do I have the ability to share?
I don't think you do.
Probably
no.
not.
But
okay.
I can't get into the
because it's behind a paywall, probably.
Yeah. Do you have the article?
I do indeed.
Why don't you text it to me and I can open it up?
Okay.
If you have the PDF.
I can send you the PDF. That's it. Let me pull up my texting app. Let's see. How do you text an article?
Just drop the PDF into the text window.
Okay. Let me grab that then. And while I'm doing that, you can ask the next question.
Well, thank you. So I've just learned that it saves my previous questions on the left. So let me see if I can find the one that it screwed up. Oh, here it is.
All right. I just sent you the paper.
Okay. Oh, okay. Here's what I objected to. And it's a different answer, by the way.
Oh.
So a virus is a submicroscopic infectious agent that requires a host cell to... See, it's totally different from the one it just gave us. And can cause a wide range of diseases in various organisms. I don't like that last part, can cause a wide range of diseases in various organisms, right?
Yes,
Most
that is
of the time,
incorrect.
They don't cause disease.
They're benign.
They can cause a wide, but that's not a defining feature, I would say, of a virus. I would not use that in the definition of a virus. Okay, that was my problem.
And in the world that I lived in, namely prokaryotic viruses, phage, a lot of the prokaryotic viruses are lysogenic, and they live happily ever after in the genome of the host, and only become virulent or lytic when they get out of control. And if you scroll, that's the paper.
So there's the article, right?
Yep. And the table is right there. This is what we need to be teaching our next generation of healthcare providers. I object to them just using medical school. I think it should be all healthcare providers, including, as I learned on one of the TWiM podcasts, is nurses contribute a lot to educating the next generation of healthcare providers. And so I think we need to be teaching everyone how to employ CDS, or clinical decision support systems, in helping patients achieve better outcomes.
So we have preclinical medical education, we have clinical training here, the two separate things
Yeah.
that they're saying. Yep. All right. So if you want to check this article out, there it is. Preparing Physicians for the Clinical Algorithm Era. Since I have it now, I can send it to you if you'd like. All right, we have a question for Dr. Schmidt. What he thinks of the T-cell detect test. I recently reviewed my notebook of lab results and saw my results again positive from that test. Does the vaccine affect it?
Oh my. Until the FDA weighs on this, I'm not going to move into this quagmire of T-cell detect. And I honestly don't know. I haven't seen enough, as Daniel said, evidence to convince me one way or the other. Vincent?
So the thing with the T-cell detect is that they take your blood and they look for circulating T cells, which is fine. But what you're really interested in for respiratory infections are tissue resident T cells, the ones that live in the tissue and stay there. They don't circulate in the blood. Those are a different kind. So, you could, in fact, I just read a paper for TWiM tomorrow where a vaccine can induce the blood T cells, but not the tissue resident T cells. So it's not necessary. So you may have these T-cell detect T cells in your blood, but you might not have them in the tissues where you need them for protection. So until work, I think we need to do more clinical studies to see the value of it. Yeah.
And early in the before this was early October of 2021. So I was vaccinated with the first course of vaccine in March of 21. And so I had a colleague test my blood with this T-cell direct type assay. And it came back and told me I had antibodies, and it told me my T cells responded to various antigenic stimuli. And I had not yet contracted COVID. And yet I had a response against the N protein of SARS-CoV-2.
Oh, you
and
must
I
have,
never,
you got it
I
from
never
a
had
common cold coronavirus that's cross-reactive epitope. Yeah.
Yep. And I also had mucosal T cell activity, and everybody was puzzled. They did the assay twice on me, and they asked me to swear blind I never had COVID. And that's why I was hesitant in responding as to what I thought of the T cell direct assay. It's all about the FDA weighing in and really knowing what the assay is asking and how to interpret the answer you're getting back. And that's why even today, if you have an antibody test done, the FDA has no opinion as to, other than the fact that you shouldn't be making any clinical decisions based on it. And that's still, I think, the FDA policy, though I haven't looked in the last few months to see if they've changed.
Okay, Kang wants to know if interferon is normally released during inflammation with or without viruses. Would a constant release increase the risk of developing autoantibodies? That's a very good question.
Too much interferon is bad. We learned that from the therapy that used to be given to people who were suffering from hepatitis.
Yeah,
specifically hepatitis C. And too much interferon had all sorts of off-target effects in those individuals. So we began to cut it with PEG, antifreeze, literally, in order to limit the off-target effects. And it wasn't as effective as now the hepatitis C protease inhibitors and other hepatitis C medications that have come since to market.
Yes, so inflammation on its own can cause interferon release in the absence of infection. So, it could increase the risk of developing autoantibodies. Yeah, but I'm not sure that that's a risk factor, because that we know a certain percentage of people in the U.S. have autoantibodies to interferon. It would be interesting to know if they have more inflammation, but that's a hard question to answer. Yeah,
it's the chicken and the egg. What was causing it? Your rheumatoid arthritis, your arthritis, life, just getting your joints old and, constantly inflaming them,
Yeah.
running injuries,
Yeah.
what
Running
could be
any kind of
responsible?
sports will cause inflammation, any injury.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michael, does thinking hard cause inflammation?
God knows. God knows. Many people who write grants continuously maintain that they have constant inflammation.
So they're making a lot of interferon. That's good. All right. Hat says, what would be the theoretical risk benefits of a theoretical antiviral drug directed at stopping the blockade of SAMD9, which is that host protein that acts as a nucleic acid. It cleaves the tRNAs, the anticodon loop of the tRNA.
Which you did last week on TWiM.
We did, and
That was Rich's Pox retry. He had his busman's holiday with you guys.
yeah, so the viruses do have anti-SAMD9 proteins, right? That's how they reproduce. So you could use that as you could try and antagonize those. That might not be a bad antiviral strategy, but it would probably be virus specific, and you'd have to diagnose the specific virus infection first, which is always challenging, right? Because
In a timely manner before the horse
right.
has left the barn.
Totally, you have to treat with these antivirals early, or they're not useful. So that would be the thing. It's not a bad target, Hat, but I think that's a challenging one, and it's also not catalytic. The best targets for antivirals are enzymes, because there's not a lot of them around because they're enzymes, and you can inhibit them almost totally with a small amount of drug, and that's maybe not the case with a viral protein that simply blocks the SAMD9 physically. You need a lot of it. Peter writes, are the news claims of the new Eris variant being more transmissible and less virulent the usual press misinformation? There's no mitigation strategies, and most people have hybrid immunity. So first of all, Peter, you can't say anything about transmissibility from just a week or 2 or 3 of looking at this virus moving around the population. You have to, and in fact, I would argue that the only thing that we're seeing is probably immune evasion, right? If it's resistant to antibodies, then it spreads through the population more effectively, which I wouldn't call increased transmissibility. That's just immune evasion. But, the less virulent, they said Omicron was less virulent, and that's not right. Because observational studies are fraught with what do you call them? Confounding factors. And we now know that people are dying all the time of Omicron and its subvariants. So these observational studies are really not. But the press likes to report these things because that's what they do, right? They want to scare people.
And the thing with infections is to appreciate that the acquisition is stochastic, and someone who lives and breathes infection control, trying to understand where the source of the microbe is in order to plug that hole is an ever-present challenge because you can't see them. And it would be nice if all the viruses were radioactive, all the bacteria were radioactive, and we could do it with a Geiger counter if it was acutely sensitive. But unfortunately, their nucleic acid is just like our nucleic acid. And absent a really fast and inexpensive system, it's hard to do in real time.
All right. What do you think of George Monbiot's book, Regenesis, about the unsustainability of animal farming and lab-grown meat alternatives using a kind of fermentation process? You know anything about that, Michael? Making meat-like stuff?
It's early days. It took us a while to figure out how to make beer, but we've been doing it well now since the ancient Egyptians. I mean, any of you who have made beer in your dorm room know that first batch is a bit not drinkable. And I think we're going to have to learn how to develop alternative proteins that don't have too many nucleic acids and are really good sources of protein that have the chew that everyone anticipates with
Mm.
protein. I mean, one of the principal complaints against tofu is it doesn't feel like you're eating anything, doesn't have the consistency
Well, you have to
that
put
you would
the key is for tofu is you put a little flour on it before you saute it, and it gets crispy, and then you get a little something to chew into. But
then
yeah,
you get a chew. And
you
food
get a chew.
science food science is an art. And I think that we in the sciences are only beginning to understand what chefs for thousands of years have learned. And that, namely, is the human race is finicky in terms of what it wants to eat.
I've spoken to a number of people about the alternatives, and they say they are not sustainable because they're very expensive and not easy to
Yes,
make. So, is it true, Michael, that animal farming is not sustainable? I don't know. That's not my
it
area.
makes too much methane. It takes up too much land. Ideally, single
Mm.
cell protein would be ideal, but unfortunately, it has too many. It has too much nucleic acid, and we'll all develop gout from it. Too many nitrogenous compounds independent of the protein.
Can we eat algae, Michael?
We can't with our current guts. We could adapt our guts
Oh,
and
do you remember there was a study a few years ago where certain populations that eat a lot of seaweed, they develop a gut microbiome
yes,
that could digest them, right?
we did that on TWiM.
We did, yeah.
There was a paper we did on TWiM.
So
Elio was very skeptical, if I'm remembering correctly. But our microorganisms adapt to what we feed them,
hmm,
and they're under constant selection and
fascinating.
adaptation. But we've lived this way principally for over 100,000 years, from our hunter-gatherer phase to the early days of farming. And getting
Man,
through the cold, dark winter is the hard part, and that's principally why we went to fermented milk and why we domesticated cattle and other animals. Remember, the domestication of farm animals, principally cattle, gave us milk, a continuous source of protein. But with that came tuberculosis.
yep. We run
And
into problems and then we solve them, right?
we run into problems and we solved them. But now I'm concerned about the number of spontaneous leprosy cases that are showing up with
Hmm.
no seemingly contact
Yeah,
with
yeah.
people.
What do you think that's from, Michael?
It's probably fomite driven. Someone has had contact with an armadillo and didn't sanitize their hands properly enough and then transferred the micro. Remember, Mycobacterium as a genus is really very resistant to all the effects of sunlight, drying. It's one of those optimal organisms that can really sit out for a long period of time. And I think, that's why leprosy was so pervasive before we began to wash our clothes and bathe regularly, because it simply was everywhere and we were continuously
Yeah,
exposed to it.
people wore the same clothes for months and months, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
And the microbes just accumulated. It's very waxy, so it would stick to anything because it's like waxed paper.
So, what was it? What was I just? Where? What's the source of the? I know you said fomite.
Armadillos.
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 Okay.
Armadillos, which have invaded South Carolina, they're throughout the Southeast. And remember, armadillos originally got the leprosy
Hmm.
in this country, likely from the graves in New Orleans, where the bodies were buried above ground, because the water table in New Orleans is so shallow. The
Hmm.
armadillos, being looking for grubs, the grubs rotting the corpse, they got into the corpse and pulled the lepers from the paupers field, and that's how they became infected.
Wow. So Florida has armadillos, right?
Florida has it, Georgia has it, South Carolina, Mississippi,
Wow.
and the newest leprosy cases have been in all places California, which I don't think has armadillos, but obviously they've had some travel history to the southeastern United States. I think there was some travel to New Orleans or Louisiana.
Michael, we have locally transmitted dengue now more
Uh-huh.
frequently. We have a bunch of malaria cases in Florida.
And Charleston, we have on average about 10 malaria cases a year in South Carolina. So
So this is a good reason to keep listening to the Microbe TV podcast, yet people are leaving in droves. Oh, well. Michael, Frank wants to know, masks are being sold that have copper threads interwoven into them or copper infused. Is this just a sales gimmick?
not knowing the density of the interwoven threads and the particulate size, uh, it's all about contact time. We know that copper metal will, and that's what it is, a copper thread, will indeed inactivate the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It will inactivate flu virus, influenza, and it will inactivate norovirus, one of the hardiest viruses out there. It's just a question of contact time before it reaches your airway. And in the case of influenza and SARS-CoV-2, it's really, we breathe on average between 12 and 20 times a minute. And will the virus encounter the copper infused thread and have sufficient contact time in order to become inactivated? And those studies, while there was a study done out of the NIH in the early days of SARS-CoV-2, that study was flawed because they did the virology in the wrong tissue culture medium that actually was using a reagent that was chelating the copper rather than using the MEM that was not going to chelate the copper. And it was all over glutamate versus glutamine. And you have to understand the chelation chemistry of copper to appreciate, because there are actually copper ions being continuously released because of its interaction with oxygen. And it's really the copper ions that are inactivating, and it's really about a function of the relative humidity. And so there are many variables. So it's a very challenging study to design, and it's got too many confounders to really make a definitive statement. So, but in reality, it could work. We just haven't demonstrated.
All the scientific answers that people don't want to hear, right?
They don't want to hear it, but
Yep.
there's truth. There's truth. I mean, I could have
Of
said,
course.
yeah, it works. But
No,
then,
but during the pandemic, they found pundits who said what they wanted to hear, right?
yes. And the trick I've learned long ago is you never overgild the lily, otherwise you'll starve as a scientist. You
Yep.
have to
Yep.
be straightforward, you have to not overinterpret your data, and you have to design the binary experiment that gives you the yes or the no, and hopefully not a maybe.
But a pundit
So
can do
right
whatever
now,
they want.
yep.
Yep. All right. Artemis says, talking about unpronounceable words, decades ago I passed my micro exam because I was able to remember the word arthroblastoconidia.
That was a fungus.
Cool. All right. School email says, Michael, what is the best way to report log reductions in micro? Also, do you report the standard deviation of the difference or the standard error of the difference with the log reduction?
Oh, God. I always have this great debate. The way the reviewers want it reported is log reduction. So most people don't think in logs. So you want at least a 4 log reduction, which is 4 orders of magnitude. But most clinicians think in percentages. They don't think in logs. And most of the experiments that are involved in looking at the built environment need to look not at standard deviation, but the standard error of the difference within the log reduction, simply because of the way things are measured. And you have to be using the non-parametric statistics methodology in order to determine if you can compare one set of data to another, simply because of the stochastic differences, because there's so many inputs into the infectious process that you can never truly replicate the experiments that you are witnessing in the built environment, even if all things are perfect, because every patient is coming in with different microbes. Every patient has a different set of comorbidities. Every environment has a different heat coefficient and air exchanges. There's just too many confounding variables, so you can't do simple analysis of variance.
All right. Glad they asked you, not me. Steph, yeah, I thought I would get to San Francisco in these past 3 years. You know, the last time I was there was 2019. That's ASM was in San Francisco in 2019.
We were
right,
there
Michael?
together.
Yep. And are we going back sometime soon, or do you know?
I don't know. I don't know where we're going next. I think we're going to Atlanta next year. And
not my favorite
I don't like
city.
going. I don't like going to Atlanta. I never can find a restaurant near the convention center. I always struggle with restaurants in Atlanta. And you can only eat so many times at the fast food places in the CNN Plaza.
Okay. Ian says,
I'm going to get hate mail.
When my parents practiced medicine and nursing, there were glass syringes and needles were sharpened and used repeatedly. What are the risks?
Aside from dull needles, a lot, because you have, the beauty of today's disposables is they are indeed sterile. Yep. My dear grandmother was an insulin-dependent diabetic for 50 years of her life, and we had a terrible time convincing her to use disposable syringes, because for 40 years she literally boiled her glass syringes in distilled water and sharpened her needles with a sharpening stone, and in order to inject herself. Today, it's very different. And, all of the plasticware that injectables are dependent upon are indeed demonstrated not only to be sterile, but more importantly, to be pyrogen free of any LPS that can cause off-target effects just by being introduced into your system. LPS is the major outer membrane crap that comes with gram negatives, and it's principally responsible for inducing cytokine storms and fever cascades. Even if the bacterium is dead, it can do it. And so all of our injectables, including every liquid that is injected into us, is tested to be pyrogen free, meaning will not generate a fever, and they're looking for any of the remnants of the dead bodies. So that's principally the problem with glass syringes. The dead bodies may still be hanging around, so you may inject LPS into your system, and so you'll have a fever or a cytokine storm, and that's the principal problem.
So I asked Jonas Salk's son if he remembered anything about polio vaccine, and he said, yeah, I remember my dad gave it to us in the kitchen, and the needles were so dull they hurt.
Yes.
Because he didn't sharpen them.
Yeah. Well, that's why it was called a jab. The
Yeah,
Brits
right.
referred to vaccination as jabs, and that's because I think they used dull needles. But hopefully they've come into the modern era and using ultra fine and ultra sharp.
Tamara says, as a new work requirement by the New York State DOH, I was required to read and sign a 16-page document about tuberculosis. The doc repeatedly referred to Mycobacterium tuberculosis as the TB germ. Acceptable?
The answer to that question is yes, because unfortunately, we have, for the most part, a science illiterate public. And one of the requirements about informed consent is that it be approachable to someone of a sixth grade reading level. And germs, for better or worse, is the generic term that we use to describe infectious agents, whether they be viruses or bacteria or fungi or even prions. They all get under that umbrella of germ. Tuberculosis is a bacterium. It grows really slowly and it's made literature. If you've read any Dickens in high school, you know how bad TB is. You just have to read Dickens to get your microbiology lesson to know you do not want consumption because that's what it does to you. It consumes you. You waste away.
I don't like TB germ, Michael, but I get your
No,
explanation.
it's all about informed consent.
Yeah,
Having
yeah.
just done my annual mandatories, where I just completed the city training for my clinical trial training, that's part of the training. Is you have to make it lay accessible.
Okay, so Christella down in the chat says, can fungi be a germ?
Yes,
Really?
the best example is Candida aureus, the one fungus that's killing a lot of people in the northwestern United States. And our clinical microbiologist, Lisa Steed, has forbidden Candida aureus from entering our campus. She says, I'm not going to have it on the campus. I don't want to ever see it on the campus. But of course, she can't control it.
Yep,
But
yep.
and it indeed, and any of you who have had athlete's foot have had a fungal germ.
Here, so Andrew says germ is better than bug for a term to describe pathogens.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. And then Bad Cat says consumption was very romantic.
Sure. Until you got it, and then you were dead.
Unfortunately, half of America reads at a sixth grade level.
We have to increase science literacy.
That's what
And
we're
I was
trying to do on
hoping
Microbe TV, aren't we?
we are indeed.
Bus Driving says, I make homemade raw cat food in my kitchen, ground raw chicken. Suggestions for cleaning. If I soak my
Uh,
utensils in bleach water, should that be good? Hydrogen peroxide wipes on counters? Michael, take it away.
the answer is yes. Remember, neat bleach is bad, and neat hydrogen peroxide or 30% hydrogen peroxide, which you probably can't buy, is also bad. It needs to be diluted with water. And Clorox on their website has a fantastic dilution protocol based on the concentration, and raw chicken is full of all sorts of scary pathogens, everything from salmonella and campylobacter, and you do not want either of those to enter you because you will feel it, and you're more importantly you don't want your cat to get it either.
Michael, you do these. What do they call them at ASM, where people throw questions at you?
Oh yes,
What
microbial myths.
microbial myths? So I was looking at them the other day. Can you get an STD from a toilet seat, Michael?
No, and I got that from a Nobel laureate, uh, uh, Baruch Blumberg, the guy who, the individual, the scientist who was at Fox Chase in Philadelphia. He worked out how to develop the vaccine for hepatitis B. He came and did a sabbatical in the lab I was a graduate student in. and we were talking. We were talking at lab meeting one day. We were TAing Med Micro or something, and we were talking about STDs. And he said, "Nah, you don't have to worry about getting an STD from a toilet seat. You have more of a risk of catching hepatitis, especially if you have an open wound on your butt, from a zit, from a pimple or something." I mean, it was very graphic. And I think Dr. Blumberg was trying to shock and awe us all.
Do you
And
remember we heard a talk at a ICAC of a guy who had an old patient in the hospital with a E. coli kidney infection, right? And his daughter came to visit. She used the toilet and she got the same isolate.
yes,
So
yes.
how did she
So
get it?
that
From the seat or from the water?
probably from the splash of flushing the toilet, and
Right,
my guess it was resident in the commode.
right, right. Okay.
Because a lot of these highly infectious E. coli, and that's what she ended up getting,
Mm-hmm.
often have, if you will, a lower infectious dose. Normally, you
Sure,
need
sure.
to interact with about 100,000 E. coli in order to get an infection. And as the virulence of E. coli increases, it drops down to Shigella levels, which are between 1,000 and 10,000. And some of these more virulent ones, especially if they're in a particulate, could attach. And again, remember, E. coli is motile, so it can swim.
Mm.
And it just needs a conduit, and that would be the water droplet.
So basically, if it's in when you urinate, you make an aerosol, and if women
Yes,
sitting on the seat, there's a shorter distance, so it's more likely to splash up and contaminate, right?
yes, the splash effect. And then flushing the toilet could
Yeah.
put the aerosol on the seat itself. And
So
like I
Michael,
say, you don't know what happens.
if you're in a hotel and you have your toothbrush on the counter there and you flush the toilet, not a good idea, right?
Bad idea. I don't keep my toothbrush I keep it on my nightstand in hotels
Keep it out of the
and
bathroom, right?
out of the area of the commode. And in my house, I'm fortunate enough that I have the commode is located in a room with a door.
Hey, in Europe, that's how they do it.
Yes,
They keep them separate because the flushing makes an aerosol which will get on your toothbrush, right?
absolutely.
Now, I hope people are listening. Tell me this, another thing. When you brush your teeth, you get bacteria in your blood, right?
Yep, for about 2 to 4 hours, depending upon your dental hygiene, depending on how bad your gingivitis or periodontitis is.
Okay.
Because as you brush, you liberate. And that's why many of these electric toothbrushes are actually stimulating your gum tone
Mm-hmm.
to enhance so that the bacteria don't get liberated. And if you have bleeding gums, you, of course, will get a higher dose of bacteria into your bloodstream. But the good news is your blood filters it out pretty quickly. You're
Mm-hmm.
bacteremic for, on average, between 2 and 4 hours. So if you brush your teeth twice a day, like most of us do, you'll be bacteremic for about 8 hours a day out of the 24.
So you become bacteria. The bacteria traverse
Are
the
filtered
gum.
out.
They
Yeah,
traverse
and
the
they
gum
go into the bloodstream.
because you have microabrasions caused by the brushing, right?
Yes.
And a
But if you
flossing
have
too, right?
if you have superior gum tone,
Yeah.
then you're less likely to bleed. It's all about bleeding. Normally, the body tries to wall itself off with that very tight epithelial junction. And that's what we desperately want to maintain is that tight epithelial junction. And there's that great battle going on in our digestive system on a continuous basis where there's a 50 micron demilitarized zone where the bacteria in our immune system are in a constant North and South Korea interaction, making certain that the bacteria don't cross the DMZ and get into our circulatory system. And
Right.
that's why salmonella is so evil, is because it can cross that DMZ and get into places like our gallbladder and into our circulatory system. And that's why salmonella is always a frank pathogen.
So Steph wants to know if where is her? Here we go. Steph wants to know: won't closing the lid of the toilet before flushing prevent aerosol issues?
Yes and no. One, you have to train everyone to do that, and there's always seepage. There's always a leak. There's always a leak, and even if you can contain it, most of today's ultra low flush toilets are really forcing that limited amount of water to evacuate the commode and push it into the sanitary sewage line. And that requires pressure. And a lot of toilets are now becoming pressure assisted, especially those of you who are interested in going on cruise ships. There, the toilet water is pressure assisted to really force the contaminants into the sanitary system of the ship.
Okay, so that reduces the aerosol.
Yeah, and they also hyperchlorinate the water in order to kill off the norovirus. If you've ever gone on a cruise, you notice the first day of the cruise, you can almost smell a little bit of swimming pool in the bathroom that you enter. And it's because they've hyperchlorinated the water. I learned that from Shipwright when I gave a seminar in Southampton, England, home of the great shipping lines. And one of the shipwrights was explaining to me their approach for nosocomial infections on ships.
Okay, Michael, because of you, we canceled dental cleaning before my husband had cataract surgery. Thank you.
Well, now that hopefully he had a good outcome from his cataract surgery, now please go back and see your dentist and get everything straightened up, because you do not want bad teeth.
Ian says, what about hospitals with open, secured windows for fresh air, not on hurricane days? Does that make any sense, Michael?
Yeah, and I'd like to point out the last case of open smallpox transmission, in which someone was admitted to a Swiss hospital and the patient had smallpox, and he also was a smoker, and the nuns wouldn't let him smoke. So he would open the window and then blow the smoke from his cigarette out the window. And the nuns, like all Swiss nuns, had their windows open to air out their bedchambers during the day. And the convection currents along the side of the building sucked the smallpox laden vapor into the rooms, and the nuns contracted smallpox. That was in the 70s, if I'm remembering correctly. One of the last documented cases is human-to-human smallpox transmission, if I'm not remembering correctly. So not so good. I would trust hospitals are very aware of good air, and they are going to great lengths to have static air exchangers to try to bring in fresh air that is departiculated, if you will.
Les says the Kennedy family has disowned his vaccination nonsense. Well,
thank goodness.
It's not going to go far, though. And Kathy says, Kathy of the yellow cauliflower, clients do not have to tell the truth, but an attorney who knows his client is lying must remove him herself, I believe.
That is good news.
Well, it's not I'm out of my lane, so
I'm out of my lane as well.
Yep. Tom says the science-based website and associates have been exposing RFK's outrageous anti-medical lies for quite a few years, and I thought Kwaman's New York Times article too sympathetic to lab leak. Yeah.
But it brings eyeballs to the New York Times website, which is probably why it got the ink.
That's the goal. If you've already taken Paxlovid for a previous COVID, can you take it again? So Daniel gets this question all the time. He said, take it as many times as you need to for separate infections, because don't take it more than one course for one infection. But
It's just like Tamiflu for influenza. If
yeah,
you've taken Tamiflu last year, you can certainly take it again this year, or one of the new anti-flu medications that have recently been released by the FDA.
Did you see the book Pandora's Gamble on lab leaks? I did not. And we were mentioned,
No.
I don't know, probably not in a good way, I would guess.
Oh my
But, you know, a
goodness.
book about lab leaks is going to sell. So that's why they write it.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the good one. Hat says, you missed the data for the lab leak. They published the sequencing data, phylogenetic tree, and lab base pair changes in Journal of Irreproducible Results. Thank you. That's a funny journal, folks, if you ever want to check it out.
Something you don't aspire to publish in.
Lena says, I like the episode with Desiree, but I'm kind of concerned it'll be taken out of context by the wider public. Well, I think you're right. I already got an email saying, why didn't you ask her about when she was doing this? And it looked like she was faking it back in 2009. I said, and that's the kind of reaction you're going to get. But Alina, the good news is the wider public is not listening to TWiV. So it's not an issue. Right, we have a very limited audience, and so far about 8,000 people have looked at that episode. Maybe 30,000 have listened to the podcast. So I'm not too concerned about it. She thought it would go viral, but I don't think it's got the quality for that. I hear RFA is polling well with both Democrats and Republicans. Well,
it's sad, and I will write to all my elected officials, counseling them against giving him any position in healthcare because of the harm it will do, and it will probably cause folks to lose their lives.
Oh, that would be a disaster.
Yeah.
That would be a total disaster. Because of insurance, many primary MDs have only 15 minutes with a patient, and AI would be quicker and likely could be more helpful on occasion. Oh, my.
Unless you happen to be a zebra. And I happen to be a zebra. I have a bizarre genetic lesion that I acquired from my dear darling grandmother. And it took my clinical team, and remember, I live at a medical school, so I have access to many very clever physicians, and it took them 5 years to figure out what drugs would combat my genetic lesion to address the genetic lesion I acquired from my dear grandmother.
And docs already follow algorithms, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. It's just putting the AI on it, and also getting them to think about probabilistic clinical reasoning, where they're looking at the likelihood, and it's encouraging them to consider all of the data. If you've been listening to Daniel's clinical updates, he constantly is getting questions about clinicians who are not looking at the data. You know, they say that the rebound effect, so we don't want to give you Paxlovid. And the virologist will immediately say what Paxlovid does is it stops viral replication. So why would you not want to take it when you have a viral infection, especially if you're going to get a bad outcome? And basing it on rebound when it's after the fact, where your immune system is dealing with the collateral damage of not getting the Paxlovid in there soon enough, that is likely the response, your body's response to the collateral damage that the early viral replication has done. And they need to look at the data that are coming out in the scientific literature And if anything, AI has to condense the literature much more effectively for the clinician. And that's what Daniel's clinical updates do,
Yeah.
is he has taken the time to condense the literature into a digestible piece that gives the busy clinician a head up before up to date gets up to date. And up to date is one of the clinical decision tools that many clinicians use. It's embedded on our electronic health record at my institution. It's embedded in the VA's electronic health record. And many institutions have up to date, which is continuously revised based on the best data from the peer-reviewed literature. And they have peers writing it for clinicians so that they provide the best care possible to their patients. I happen to teach evidence-based decisions to our dental students, and I tell them continuously, go to the literature, look for resources that you can use quickly that will give you the leg up on giving your patient the best possible care. Because everybody wants a superior outcome. No one wants a mediocre outcome.
Of course not. David says, here's what Bard said to the same question. What is a virus? A virus is a non-living infectious agent that can only replicate inside a living cell. So I think it falls a little short. Here is my definition. I put this up on Instagram today. A virus is a piece of genetic material, DNA or RNA, and a protein coat that must enter cells to reproduce. And that's the shortest I can get. But the key is to have a piece of genetic material and a protein coat. Because if you just say a non-living infectious agent, that doesn't tell you what it is. Right? So I don't think
Absolutely.
That's a great definition.
And when you changed your image to the 1 times 10 to the 23 viruses per second, I said, not quite a mole of virus yet.
Not 10 to the 23, right? 6 times 10 to the 23.
Yeah, you don't have quite a mole of virus replicating every second.
Nope.
So not quite a mole, but pretty close.
ChatGPT will not usually give the same answer to the same question. The regenerate answer is there to do that. Okay. Hi, Michael. Copper alloys on hospital surfaces can reduce nosocomial infections by 60%. Is there a cost-effective analysis of the implementation of this intervention?
It lived on the CMS website for about 3 months, and it does indeed become cost-effective. Its a return on investment is on the order of less than 2 months. It really depends on your nosocomial or healthcare acquired infection rate. And it truly does indeed work. Where it falls down is you need to have a significant infection rate in order for it to really quickly pay for itself. 3 months is sometimes too long, and right now the penalties for infection rates are not attractive enough because the business guys will buy a revenue generating machine before they'll purchase a revenue sparing machine. And this copper basically spares revenue that they won't lose to having a high infection rate. The contrast is in countries where all healthcare is paid for by a single payer, namely the government. It does indeed pay for itself because they pay for anything. In the United States, because we don't have a single payer system and it's diffused over insurance companies, the individual, and the government, because we're all paying for it. So, Senator Sanders is indeed right. If we understood single payer healthcare, we would be better off because we would understand how to make better informed decisions about what stuff will work and how we can all afford quality health care.
We have a DDS in the house, Michael. Are you teaching any viral influence on periodontal disease?
Just a little. And that's only because Vincent makes me. No, seriously, we introduce them to viruses, and as you know, being a dentist, the periodontal environment is a complex interplay, and anything that influences inflammation will exacerbate periodontal disease. And what do viruses do better than most, Vincent? Inflame situations. And that's, after all, what we see with SARS-CoV-2. It's, we really become significantly ill during the inflammatory phase, that second week. And, there are viruses that do indeed affect that epithelial layer that can exasperate things.
So Tom thinks it's an interesting take on not quite a mole. It's almost a mole, right, Michael?
Yes, it's almost a mole.
But not quite.
Yeah, we need six. We need six
more,
sixfold more.
Which is, it's probably the error of the calculation, Michael, don't you think?
It probably is.
All right. Let me go back. I just scrolled down to get to that. So let me go back up. Where is my little star here to mark my... There it is. So Raphael says, when I heard about how ChatGPT works, I felt it's like a pyramid scheme for adding infinite useless data. You add inputs, then somebody else add inputs, then more and more. Scam alert. You can get weird results with ChatGPT. You have to be careful. I once asked, who is Amy Rosenfeld, and it made up papers that she had published.
That's why I think we need to, writing manuscripts, it's very important to explain how you've reached your conclusions, the statistics that you have done. And one of the dangers of artificial intelligence, and when I was learning how to do math, I always had to show my work. You just couldn't put an answer on the paper. And I think that's what we do in science. We show our work. And that is one of the most important lessons I think we can start teaching in middle school about science, is show your work. And that's how we're going to get around ChatGPT, just writing term papers. You're going to have to show your work, show your outline, show how you arrived at your process. Because when I was taking high school composition on how to write a term paper, we had to first do an outline. We then had to expand the outline. You remember this, Vincent. You're old like me. So
of course,
that's how we did it. You had to show your work. You just couldn't turn in a paper. But today, I think we run the risk of not understanding how we arrived at a conclusion.
Yeah. Show your work. Nobody does that anymore, right?
Hey, when I was defending my dissertation, I did my dissertation research on selenium transport. Selenium is right below sulfur in the periodic table. It's a schizophrenic element. It's named after the moon. It loves to be both oxidized and reduced. And so one of my committee members asked me the question, so where is selenium used? And I came up with this, the pad answers. It's generally in redox enzymes because it's involved in the exchange of electrons. It does it very quickly and efficiency in a catalytic manner. And I said, it's also used in Xerox machines. And so then my committee member asked me, so Michael, how does a Xerox machine work? How does the selenium affect the transference of the image that the light is seeing to a piece of paper? I didn't know, but I know now. And it's really pretty clever. It's, if you imagine xerography, it's nothing more than a glorified coffee can that has a high energy charge applied to it. And as that light goes across the glass, scanning the shadows on the paper, it transfers the static electricity to the drum. And as the drum rolls across the paper, it transfers the static charge to the paper. And then there's a little salt shaker at the end of the path of the paper that it salts toner cartridge on that sticks to the static of the paper. And then there's an iron at the end that irons the carbon particles to the paper. And the next time you do a copy on a photocopier, you'll notice that the paper comes out warm. And
Sure.
that's because the iron has ironed the carbon particles on to the paper. And color xerography is even more fascinating because now we can tell the difference between black and white and green and blue, and 4-color xerography gives you the colors of the rainbow. So
It's amazing.
It's really quite fascinating. And I never knew that until Dr. George Hageman asked me that question during my defense, and I'll never forget. And I went out and learned how xerography worked.
It's brilliant. I love it. I love technological advances like that, right?
Well, it really is fascinating because if you can see it in your mind's eye, and I understand things like coffee cans, and I understand things like irons, and because my dear mother taught all her sons how to iron a shirt properly, and it's absolutely fascinating.
Should we get RSV vaccine? You bet. 60 and up. Get it. Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to have that discussion with my primary care physician when I see him in September. And I'm already getting the boosted influenza vaccine for folks over the age of 60. RSV, I think, you don't want an RSV infection. My nephew's young daughter, she was a COVID baby. She was born during 21. She got RSV and she was hospitalized twice for it with very significant breathing challenges during the first year of her life. So it's no joke.
Yeah, it's a good vaccine. I would get it. I'm over 60, obviously, and I'm going to get it. You have to talk to your provider to make sure everything is aligned, but yeah, it's highly recommended. Yesterday, the BMJ, a new variant, 30 different changes in spike. How significant is this? It depends on whether it becomes a dominant variant and how currently, the circulating variants, the ones that predominate, are resistant to most antibodies induced by the vaccine. And so now in the fall, there's going to be an updated booster. But my feeling is that by the time that vaccine is deployed, the variants will have changed sufficiently so that it's evaded. I really don't think those antibodies make much of a difference. I think it's the T cells that really save you in the end, and other mechanisms that are not antibody-based. So I think this idea of giving an updated booster every year is not going to work. It's not going to provide much help.
Unless, as Daniel has pointed out, if you have comorbidities where your healthcare provider suggests that you need to have oomph in your circulating antibody levels. And again, that's why it has to be a shared decision-making between you and your provider, because your provider knows as well as you whether or not it will benefit you. It's not a black and white issue. And I think that's what Daniel has been saying over and over again. Have those discussions with your provider.
Yeah, I think, that's correct, Michael. You have to, especially have comorbidities, because if you get any kind of infection, no matter how mild, some people will send you to the hospital no matter what. So you have to talk about that. So it could be useful for 3 months to have that boost in antibodies. Yeah. There was a thing here I wanted to bring up. Where was that? Oh yeah, Wondering World. Vincent, you are technically not allowed to say I am over 60. Obviously, yeah, I'm sorry. I was just assuming everyone knew me here, and so
Yes.
if I said I'm over 60, people will say, yeah, well, we know that. So that's why I appended that. But you're right. I don't look 60 for sure.
You don't feel 60.
I
I
don't feel
mean,
60.
good grief, you work like you're 25. I mean, you're approaching Avogadro's number of podcasts.
Yeah, I like doing it. It's a lot of fun.
It is.
Okay, Michael, could you have gotten infected by SARS-CoV-2 but without any symptoms?
According to the current literature, the answer to that question is yes. I've been infected with SARS-CoV-2 twice that I have evidence for, both antigen as well as PCR confirmed. And my symptoms were relatively mild, a runny nose, and it was before Paxlovid was widely available, so I never had gotten Paxlovid. So I could have one of the blood types that, or the HLA markers, not the blood type, the HLA marker that suggests to be asymptomatic. That was a paper that Daniel covered on TWiM Clinical Update a few weeks ago, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah, he did it, and we did it in the same week in deep dive.
Oh, that's right. You did it. You did the deep dive.
Yep.
Yeah, I heard them
paper.
both.
That was a great
It
paper.
was.
This is very funny. I have to go ahead to this comment. I'm jealous of Vincent's hair. What are you jealous about? You're like, I don't dye my hair, folks. Look at that. It's just brown.
You have the Italian gene.
Is that right? The Italian gene does that, but my beard is.
I got
gray.
I got my mother's premature gray, and my grandfather's losing of the hair.
Men preening. Okay, Artemis, why are antivirals not effective later in an infection? Because most, not all, or I should say many viral infections are very quick. So if you take SARS-CoV-2, most infections are on the downslide by 5 to 7 days. So if you wait too long, there's no effect. You do not make an impact on the viral peak if you take it too long. And so that's the thing. Now, if you have an infection that goes for 10 years like HIV, then
or hepatitis,
then you have plenty of time to take antivirals. And that's why there are so many antivirals for those long-term virus infections. But for influenza and SARS-CoV-2, there's just not a lot of time, so it's hard. Yeah, it's almost over.
It's not a persistent infection like HIV.
Yep, and hepatitis viruses. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
I like this one here. My teammate just got COVID in Fairbanks. He's on Paxlovid.
That's good.
Paxlovid. It's a good name for it.
And doctors should be nervous because of his kidneys if he's got limited kidney function. And that is the discussion that he should have had with his doctors and the pharmacists. And they would have likely adjusted the Paxlovid that he was taking, eliminating. Remember, Paxlovid is 2 drugs, and the ritonavir comes out when you have you have limited kidney function. And Daniel has gone over that many times on it, and he said that is a discussion you need to have with your provider. They'll do a kidney function test on you to understand whether or not they have to take out the ritonavir. And, rightly so. When they were designing that drug, they made it so that it would be ritonavir out, because they could have just made one pill.
Ritonavir was developed as an HIV protease inhibitor, and it turned out it was a cytochrome inhibitor that makes drugs last longer. Yeah, side benefit of that. Is there an optimal time to get the RSV vaccine? So that's a good question, because as you know, the clinical trials were all done within months of vaccination, right? Where you have high antibody and T cells. So we don't know how durable the response would be. But since RSV is a winter disease, the idea would be if you get 3 months of good protection, you get it in the fall, and then it'll protect you for the winter season, right?
And many health departments publish their seasonal viruses, and you can look at past years' data to know
Mm.
when influenza hit, when RSV hit. And so you can generally find it at the CDC site, and you drill into the various states, at least for influenza. And you can see when your last year's influenza peak was, and you can sort of time your vaccination schedule.
Hans says, in Matters Microbial, you stated that probably in some 20 years SARS-CoV-2 will become a benign virus. Why hasn't rabies virus become benign? Well, because it's not a human virus. It's not circulating in people and inducing great immunity over the years, right? SARS-CoV-2 is a human virus. Almost everyone has it multiple times. You get good immunity, and that's what makes it a benign virus. Rabies is a spillover from another species. It's not a
Probably
dog.
Canis,
The dogs get it from
Canis or
other
bat,
animals, right? Bats,
bats.
probably the reservoir, and other animals get it. They get deadly sick, and we get it from dogs and other animals, but it's just spillover and rare. So we do not develop the population immunity that you need. There you go. Oh, this is for you, Michael. The question is, was beer a byproduct of bread making, or was bread a byproduct of beer brewing? I love that.
Yes, I think is the answer. As a chicken and the egg question.
You think? Well, you can't say yes because there are two questions there, Michael.
Well,
It's
you
both.
know,
Both are correct.
well, remember most of the live yeast that my grandmother used to buy at the grocery store was made by Anheuser-Busch,
Mm.
and it came from beer making, and it was sold in little cake form in the refrigerated section next to the butter and the eggs. Because I remember going shopping with her and picking up a chunk of yeast, and that's how she would make bread. And so my guess is bread making was a byproduct of beer brewing. They had this extra material
Okay,
and they saw what it could do. And
got it. Angry Penguin made beer in a 7-liter fermenter during my research days. It was absolutely horrible.
uh-huh, they didn't show their work. They just gave you the beer.
Michael, can beta hemolytic strep become a persistent infection? Can it present as patchy areas of inflammation on the skin of lower extremities that are tender to touch?
Anything can become a persistent infection. That's called developing into a biofilm. So it has to have the right circumstance. And again, understanding, we're only beginning to really appreciate the triggers that cause things to become persistent. And the strep and the staph are notorious for establishing biofilms. One of the most horrid things is when streptococci infect heart valves, and they literally establish a biofilm on our heart valve. And so my suspicion is yes, it can do all of the things. And remember, one of the virulence determinants of strep is it can make erythrogenic toxins that will give you a rash and recruit the immune system, which will give you inflammation. And impetigo, which is a variant, both staph and strep can cause impetigo, um, can similarly infect lower extremities. That will be tender to the touch. Generally, that happens in infants, and it's also triggered by a lysogen of a phage that the strep has to have. And it sort of falls in and out of circulation depending upon population dynamics.
Insects are a good source of nutrients. I was at a restaurant recently where they put grasshoppers on my salad. They're actually tasty. They were crunchy and not at all repulsive. What a recommendation! Not at all repulsive, right?
Yeah.
Should I get a Hep A and B vaccine? I live in India. I believe so.
I've had a Hep B vaccine and a Hep A vaccine because of some of the travel I have done in the past. The good news is today's Hep A vaccine you only need to take once. When I got vaccinated for Hep A, it had a timeline where you had to get reboosted. Now the new Hep A vaccine, I believe, is lifetime immunity, or it's gotten to a point where they'll declare lifetime immunity. And Hep B, hopefully you're a responder.
Are they now going to kill all the armadillos in Florida because of this? I hope not.
You mean leprosy?
Yeah.
My guess is it's going to be hard to find all the armadillos. And remember, the armadillos are doing us a service. They're eating grubs that are destroying, they're basically keeping the insects population in check. And, there's a reason armadillos are around. And the fact that they're getting leprosy, I think the municipalities that clean up the roadkill of armadillos are indeed schooled in the art of collecting the armadillo as carefully as possible so as not to contaminate the workforce. So if you were out and you happen to kill an armadillo, don't go up and pick it up and take it to a vet. Just leave it in the road. And unfortunately, it's cruel, but you don't want to run the risk of catching leprosy. Though we have good drugs for leprosy, they haven't become drug resistant as of yet.
Why no visual for TWiM?
Vincent and I did a visual TWiM on the last episode. Hopefully it'll go up in the next week.
That's 293, right?
Yeah,
it'll go up next week. Yeah.
It was just Vincent and I. Originally, our former co-host, Dr. Schechter, didn't want to do visual. He wanted to make it oral because it was either easier for him, and it was probably a technology issue. In the early days, we did Skype, and Skype wasn't that great visually.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it. We would have to get everyone's agreement, of course, and I'm not sure that would happen. That's the thing. Michael and I are obviously for it, but it's not clear. Let's see. What was I going? Oh, yes. Patricia needs to contact Dixon. Patricia, give me an email, Vincent@microbe.tv, and I'll pass your email on to him, okay? And you could talk to him about it. Dr. Schmidt, I know that intelligence is hard to define, but in your mind, what is the simplest creature that you would consider to have some intelligence?
Oh, now we're getting into anthropomorphizing things. You begin to wonder if E. coli can think, or some of these bacteria really have sentience but they are continuously reacting with their environment. And thought, I guess, is operationally defined as you have to know your thinking to be thought to have intelligence. And I don't know whether our microbial friends are thinking about having intelligence. And so I would think it's one of those philosophical questions that, not being a philosophy major, this is a question more appropriate for Daniel, who was a philosophy major, I think, at college. Tell Daniel we threw him under the bus.
I think Frank asked that same question of Nell Zeldy, yeah. And it was hard. It was hard because, if E. coli goes towards a chemical gradient, right, we say, oh, it's just a chemical reaction, but maybe that's what intelligence is, just reacting. You don't have to have a nervous system, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. It's all about how we define it. What the heck? Is it true, Michael, that leprosy incubation period can be years?
Yes.
Wow.
They're slow growers. It's probably a function of dose. And remember, they literally live in the dendritic layer. They infect our dendrites and they grow in our dermal layer. They like to live at about 30 to 33 degrees C, which is why they infect the tips of our nose, our fingertips, our toes,
Yep.
and other areas that are cooler, which is why they like the armadillo, because the armadillo's temperature is 33 degrees.
Alina says, I can help with the Atlanta recommendation. So Vincent at
Oh, great.
microbe.tv. I wanted to show you my father's microscope, okay? It is so heavy. This is from the 50s or 60s, okay? And it's all intact. It's a little dusty, as you can see, but it needs a light. But other than that, you see it's got three
It's got a mirror.
objectives.
It doesn't need a light. You just need a light source to shine on the mirror.
And it's got three objectives. See that? Really heavy. This thing is 40 pounds. So it's yours, Alina. My dad. All right. What else? Oh, yeah, I think this is funny. I will just hang out with a copper pipe. Yeah.
You can do worse things.
How would a copper nose ring be, Michael? Would that help with respiratory infections?
The study hasn't been done. My guess is it doesn't have enough surface area to make a difference, because the air will get around it. It'll be locally sanitizing, but that's about it.
Angry Penguin read a study recently that some people given acellular pertussis vaccine were found to have pertussis antibodies not from vaccine antigen. The theory is they got subclinical infection.
That could be.
Why not?
I mean, I have been vaccinated against pertussis, and I was hanging out with my pediatric friends, and I actually had God-fearing pertussis. And it was at the end of my DPT before I was boosted. It was at the end of the 10-year window. And I got pertussis, and one of my pediatrician colleagues got pertussis. And the only way we knew we had pertussis is by our coughs. And I literally had a cough for 100 days, and it was nasty. I had to use those lidocaine infused pearls just to sleep at night.
Oh boy.
Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible. You want to make sure you get your vaccination boosted on time for pertussis.
Apparently, Byron thought consumption was the way he hoped to die. Unfortunately, he got malaria instead.
Consumption versus malaria. I don't know what could be worse. Both are pretty bad.
Malaria is not good. Yeah.
No.
Andrew wants to know, what about composting toilets? No flush, so I assume they would be safer.
The problem is it has to go someplace, and composting, as you know, takes time. And the problem is you need the surface area to compost, and the average human makes about 200 grams of stool a day. So you multiply that by your household, and then you figure out the composting area that you need in order to process that amount of stool per day. Composting toilets have been looked at seriously for pig farms. The problem between pigs and people is, while we only make about 200 grams a day, a pig makes 2 kilos.
Wow.
So they make a lot. And so that's why hog lagoons are such a significant problem for the hog growing region of the country.
Michael, what's the foremost practical thing about microbes you wish normies knew?
That they're more friends than enemies, that our microbiome serves a very important role in actually protecting us from infections. It gives us lots of vitamins and minerals. It's involved in global mineral cycling, It basically makes over half the air we breathe, and it's responsible for keeping our planet safe. And as we did most recently on TWiM, it's probably the reason we have earthquakes.
Oh, that was amazing. That was
Yes.
amazing. Plate tectonics initiated by bacteria. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. You have to go
Who
listen.
knew?
Who knew? Yes, that was just bacteria do everything. All right, Spamlet says, I got the polio shots from the big glass syringe with the blunt needle, and my brother ran away to avoid it and got given a sugar cube next time. Who says crime doesn't pay? That's good.
Yeah, but then your brother gave you polio when he was using the same toilet as you. He gave you the variant.
Frank says, what determines the infectious dose of a virus or bacterium? Why wouldn't one lucky bacterium be able to double and double? Ah, there you go. Take it away, Michael.
The infectious dose is dependent upon many, many variables, and it's really access to a replication site in which the immune system is not going to attack it, or the competition from its microbial brethren is not going to be so fierce. And the best example here is what Salmonella does in our gut. Salmonella is an invader of the human host, and it does all sorts of weird things to effectively limit the ability of E. coli to grow, and it effectively doubles, and it doesn't take very many of them because Salmonella happens to be an intracellular parasite and infects the endothelial layer, and then it's a chronic cascade. We did a couple of episodes on the bizarre behaviors of Salmonella, which is why we have such thing as TSI slants that no one knew how they worked until the type 3 secretion system was worked out and people began to understand the metabolic role that Salmonella was doing with our endothelial layer. And it really is about that dynamic, and which is why our microbiome is so important to have this balanced competition going on in our gut. And when that equilibrium is disrupted, that's generally when we get things like diarrhea or intestinal upset, whether it be gas or inflammation, which is cramping, or even fever.
Similar idea for viruses, Greg. First of all, not every virus particle is infectious. Mm-hmm. For some viruses, only 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 are infectious. Also, the immune response at the site of infection can make a big difference as well. Physical barriers, mucus, low pH, and so forth. So all of these, we have animals in general have really good defenses of all kinds, not just immune, but physical and chemical defenses. So it's hard for one particle to do it. Even noroviruses, which are very infectious, you still need about 15 to start an infection, which is really good, right?
And the doubling answer is they end up making too much waste, and no one likes to have divide in their own stool.
Airy ozone. As a former formula-fed infant, what am I lacking in my microbiome that breastfed babies receive? Is there a means of populating my gut with good stuff I missed out on?
You've probably already done that. And some of the studies that have come out is by the time the toddler is aged 5, their microbiomes have merged if they're eating a normal diet. It's just those early days. And this is one of the great avenues of research that folks are doing in the microbiome space, is really understanding that early colonization of our gut and who's required when. And that was the intent of that paper that we recently covered about breastfeeding. I think in the most current episode, I think that is posted. I'm always a few behind in terms of posting because we record them a couple of weeks back, so I never know where we are.
Yeah, we do a lot. Michael, I read they were having trouble sterilizing root canals of fecalis bacteria. How do fecal bacteria get into root canals?
They basically come in with your mouth. I mean, when they do a root canal, they effectively uh, remove the root by using those hand files or electric files that they're using now. And you basically have a hole. And so it's very challenging to keep everything dry. And so consequently, the bacteria are just resident. They'll add bleach, and they actually use bleach to sanitize the root canal.
Wow.
And it's really challenging to get the bleach into the and if you've ever seen root canals, it's not like one giant cavity. They really go to great lengths, and endodontics is really a fascinating uh, discipline. The ancient Egyptians actually developed the original packing material that they put into the root canal, and the dentist know this as gutta percha, which the Egyptians would pack in. And that packing material is a resin, and today we use cement and many antimicrobials. People have experimented with antimicrobials, antibiotics in it, but the fecalist generally finds a way, and it generally gets in there. Some folks have thought of using cold plasma, where they put a a very thin, almost like the file that they're using, and it generates oxygen radicals on the fly. And that has shown some promise at sanitizing the canal better than bleach. It's all about, can the disinfectant reach the bacteria, and does the disinfectant have sufficient contact time to inactivate all the bacteria? Because eventually they'll come back. But the problem is remember, any strong oxidant, and bleach happens to be a strong oxidant, will cause a fraction of the population to transform into what is termed a VBNC state, a viable but non-culturable state. And a strong oxidant will take the population from about 0.3% VBNC all the way up to 90% VBNC. So while you may think it's sterile, once that is packed and it's filled, then the bacteria will start to grow because they're eating your flesh. And that's when it becomes infected again. It's a big mess.
All right, Doreen, thank you so much for your support of science communication. Appreciate it. And I got one more question. There are a lot of questions, but it's 10 p.m. We need to wrap it up. I just want to answer this one. Time goes fast, doesn't it, Michael, when you're having fun?
It does.
All right. Besides principles of virology, is there an authoritative account of the history and development of virology that you would recommend? Oh, my gosh, is there? Here it is. If I'm going to show this on the screen, you go to Fred Murphy, so utmb.edu/virus images. I will put the link in the chat right now. And this is his book. Fred Murphy wrote the history. It's free. It's an ebook. It's really big. It's huge, but he's got everything here. We even have a TWiM episode with Fred interview there.
Cool.
But this right here, the Foundations of Virology, you click on that, and it's going to take forever to download, so I'm going to cancel it there. But this is the definitive history of virology, in my opinion. Okay. And
I think I saw that picture in the British Museum.
Yeah, that's the guy putting mosquitoes on him to show that they carry yellow fever virus. Yeah. So check that out. Everybody, check it out. It's free. They printed out a copy, and they brought it to ASV this year. It was like 5-6 inches thick. It's his labor of love, and so check it out. It's free. And you'll learn all about virology. It even has Vincent Racaniello in it, a young Vincent Racaniello. Why, I don't know, but I'm in there. All right, folks, that'll do it for another Office Hours. I want to thank our mods for tonight. We had Tom, we had Steph, we had Les, we had Andrew, we had Frank, we had Vanity Nutrition, almost the whole gang here. Thank you so much for keeping it civil here. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm always thrilled to to see everybody here. You know, I never know what's going to happen, and then I'm thrilled. And Margot wants to know, is TWiV live for questions? No, we don't do TWiV live. Although, Michael, maybe sometime we should live stream it when it's you and me. We should do a live stream TWiV.
Yeah.
What do you think? See,
Yeah,
Michael
that would be
Michael is
fine.
game. If I say to Michael, "Let's do this," he's good with it. It's really nice to.
And
work
I
him.
wasn't even getting fidgety at 2 hours. So I often get yelled at for going long. So I apologize.
No problem. Michael, thank you so much for joining tonight. Always good.
I'm
stories
happy to
from
do
you.
it. It's always fun to get questions, and that's the way you learn. You just ask questions and drive people crazy with your curiosity.
And let's see, where am I going next? Next week I'll be at the University of Vermont in Burlington, and then after that, I can't remember. I'm going to Baltimore, but just for a couple of hours. Then I'm going to Milan, and then I'm going to Chicago for ASTMH. Okay, so if you're in any of those places and you want to meet up, check it out. Now, next week there will be no office hours because I'll be in Vermont, but the week after we'll resume. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And until we see you next time, be safe, okay? Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.